to another episode of Truth for Me. We're going to be starting this series of Simple Gospel. This is number one of the Simple Gospel series that will be uploaded here to Truth for Me. And we're just going to look at simple gospel truths about how a person can know for sure they can be in heaven at the end of life. And I know there's nothing more important. I don't know what you think, but the Bible would teach us that there's only two roads through life, one that leads upwards and the other that leads downward. And so, with that in view, and considering that not only is the Bible teaching as the teaching of Jesus Christ, God's Son himself, it becomes very, very important that we come to an understanding of why is it, how is it that we need to be ready to go to the place that's up, place called heaven. And so there's a verse that might seem a little shocking to some. It's found in Romans chapter 3, and verse 10 says, "There is none righteous, no, not one." And then there's another verse just a little further down that says, "There is none that doeth good, no, not one." There isn't anybody here on earth that does good. And so that's an amazing truth considering how we measure good and how the world in general evaluates a good person in contrast to a bad person. So I'm going to ask the question here today, and we're going to try and look at it from the Word of God. The question is, when is good not good enough? And so, this becomes uh, really important because I would understand that I'm going to be talking to a lot of good people here through this video. And if you're listening, you might be one of those good ones. And so, how do we really define good as far as here in this world? Well, a person that's good is going to be a person that helps out when somebody has need. And so maybe somebody is in need of a help to change their flat tire at the side of the road. And of course, you're busy and you got a tight schedule, but because you're a good person, you stop and you go and you help that person. You get your pants a little bit dirty and your hands a little bit dirty, getting that tire out and that tire on. And so, you know what? I commend you on that. That's being a good person. And maybe a good person might be defined as somebody that well, the neighbor is sick, and so let's take some food over to the neighbor and let's help out as much as we can. And maybe there's maybe there's some painting needs to be done in an elderly person's house and they can't do it any longer. And so because you're a good person, you volunteer to do that painting. And you know something? Do we ever need a whole lot more just like you in this world? People that are good. And then there's all kinds of people and they're giving and you're giving to charities, to good charities that are helping out other people, whether it's sick foundations or whether it's social needs foundations that have been established. And, well, you just want to help out. And so you dig into your bank account and out comes a few hundred or a few thousand. And, for those who are really, really, really wealthy, and that likely leaves most of us out, you got those that are donating not only millions, but sometimes billions of dollars to a good cause. They donate billions of dollars because they want to find a cure for, well, let's just say COVID at this point, or they want to find a cure for cancer. And so out of their wealth and out of their net worth of billions and billions and billions of dollars, they are actually donating billions themselves. What good people. And I say again, do we ever need more good people? And I'm going to make it personal to you, that is, we need more good people just like you. But then the question is, when is good or why is good not good enough? And so looking at when is good not good enough, well, good is not good enough when it comes to getting into heaven. God is holy, heaven is holy, and every one of us, despite being good as far as earthly standards and human being standards are concerned, well, being good is just not good enough for God's holiness. Every one of us are sinners. Yes, the Bible does say, "For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God." For all. Yes, all the people that we consider to be good people. People like me that maybe not so much in the good category, but a person like me is a sinner. A person like you that might be in the real good category, humanly speaking, yes, you are a sinner too. And so, when is good not good enough? It's not good enough for people that are sinners to get into heaven. And I ask the question, well, why would that be? Why is good not good enough? Well, very simply because God has one standard, and you and I have another standard. God's standard is the standard of holiness. Our standard around us today, whichever direction we want to look, our standard is the standard basically of doing the best we can, and maybe even good might be defined as being better than another person. So, in relative to another person that's, well, they're a little questionable in some of their characteristics, you might put yourself into that category of being a good person. So, the category of good on earth is not the category of good in heaven. And so, because of our sin, we cannot get into heaven. Have you ever thought about what is stronger, light or darkness? It's interesting just to let your mind slip away into some of these things. And of course, every night is dark. Some nights darker than others when the moon's not shining or the stars are blocked because of the clouds. But the night is dark. But the morning, the sun's rays start to be seen in the east, and the orange glow, and then up comes the sun little by little, and more light as the sun gets higher and higher. And of course, we know as the sun starts to appear, the darkness goes away. So we can see that the brightness and the glory and the outshining of the sun, of the light of the sun, just dispels the darkness. Light is always stronger than darkness. And the opposite at the end of the day, when the sun disappears, in comes the darkness. And darkness really is just the absence of light. So the light is always that which trumps darkness. So when we think of the light we might say in respect to the light of heaven, that's God's holiness. God being holy has a perfect standard. He is perfect. Holy means the complete absence of sin, the complete absence of that which is not holy like God, the complete absence of that which displeases God and is against his holy character. And so our sin is like the darkness. God's holiness is like the light. And wherever the light is, even in the earthly uh, respect here, when the light of the sun comes, away goes the darkness. The two cannot mix. Light always trumps darkness. And so the light of God's holiness, that means the complete absence of that which is defiling and dirty and sinful, and anything less than the holy standard that characterizes God's own character. That is considered the darkness. That's considered sin. And so that's why the good of our earthly standard isn't good enough for the heavenly standard, because the heavenly standard is a holy one. And so when a person from earth, I'm just going to use an example here, supposing they got to the door of heaven and say, okay, God, I want to come into heaven, but they've still got their sin. You see, the light of God's holiness is going to keep that person out of heaven. There's no way that the darkness of sin can enter into God's holy presence of divine light. Impossible. So that's when good, and that's why good is not good enough to get into heaven. God is holy. We are sinners. But I just can't finish this video without telling you something wonderful. That There was a day when God sent His Son into this world. I could go on for a little while talking about this, but I'm only going to be a minute. So stay tuned, okay? He sent His Son into this world because He knew we were not good enough. And He sent His Son all the way from heaven. He came all the way down, born as a baby, and lived here for over 30 years. And then He was nailed to a cross. You might say, how tragic. Yes, how tragic, yet how loving, because it was God's love that sent Him to this world with the specific purpose of dying on a cross. And you say, why would He have to die? If Jesus was good, Jesus was holy, and Jesus was God, why would He have to die on a cross? Because God, who is holy and God, who is light, wanted to do away with the darkness of our sin so that we could get into His holy presence and be with Him forever and forever. And so when Jesus died, He died for my sin. God commends His love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. We read that Christ died for the ungodly, or the person that doesn't have the holiness of God, the person that still has the darkness of sin in their life, and not that holy standard that's going to allow them to get into heaven. Christ died for the ungodly. I like a verse, John chapter 3 and verse 16. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish, but have everlasting life, but have the holiness that God says will allow you into heaven. And so, my dear listener today, you need God's Son in your life. You need to be saved from the darkness of your sin, because good is not good enough to get into heaven.